Welcome back to the 2017 NORML Conference here at Vapor Central. We've got an excellent panel up here: cannabis growing, personal, patient, and large production. We've got up here on as our moderator, Jack Lloyd. Then we got Marcus Bubbleman Richardson. Then we got Kevin Ferret, not here. Jose Domingez from Canveda, Matt Rogge from 7 Acres. Take it away, Jack.
So it's my great pleasure to present the Growers panel, which should be a fantastic panel at the NORML Conference this year. And so part of what's really exciting is that massive changes are happening as far as how cannabis law for growers is changing. And so part of my questions, we're going to go through with each of these growers. We're going to talk about sort of how the law is changing and also sort of what effect that has on how cannabis is cultivated in Canada. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question, and then each of my panelists is going to offer their response, and we'll go through my list, and then at the end we'll have questions. So we're very fortunate to have this group of growers here today. So the first question is, what effect does plant limit have on a craft cannabis grower? Does it foster innovation, or does it inhibit efforts to produce better plants through growing and breeding practices? Or is the answer somewhere in between? And so we're really fortunate because we have growers licensed through the ACMPR with as licensed producers, and also growers with MMAR, Allard protected MMAR licenses, and personal or designated grower licenses. So some great issues that we're going to raise, and take it away. We'll start with Marcus, I think.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming and checking out the panel. I guess my reply would be that nowhere in Canada in the agricultural community are there plant limits placed on any single agricultural product that we grow. So why would we have them for cannabis? Obviously, it's a leftover of prohibition. It's, you know, them trying to change into this new paradigm, new mechanism that's going to exist in Canada. But the bottom line is, and this same question came up in Jamaica. I have a company there as well. And one of the gentlemen from the Minister of Agriculture said, you know, we need to have limits. We need to make it so only everyone that wants to grow can only grow an acre. Gotta love Jamaica, eh? Only an acre. So pretty good plant limits, but nonetheless limits. And so, you know, my partner in Jamaica worked in the agricultural community for 40 years, John Sayers, and he got up right away and just said, listen, we do not put limitations on agricultural products. That's not how agriculture works. So I think that it's a huge hindrance, and that it's merely left over from prohibition, and it will not possibly last.
And actually, just to interject, do you feel, I know, say with a product like wheat or grain in areas like Aberdeenshire in Scotland has the highest concentration of grain per acre because they don't have a lot of space that's viable for growing. I'm not sure exactly the reason, but they're growing a lot of grain on a very small amount of land. Do you foresee, like, and actually this is very interesting for all three of you, what are your thoughts? If you have limited space, can you maximize production with plants in an outdoor grow?
Limited space, maximize your production.
Like if you only have an acre.
You know what, yes, and I kind of want to come at this question a little bit differently. The real hindrance is that this is a plant that produces essential oils. Okay, this is an essential oil secreting plant, and essential oils express themselves through a multitude of things. They express themselves through variables, which are environmental, and the people that are taking care of those plants, and then they express themselves through their genetic diversity and through the actual potential that the genetics have available. So when you put variables and you put genetic potential together, you produce these essential oils. Now, in the world of essential oils, lavender, for an example, the best lavender in the world, this is coming from the essential oil community, is generally found in France. There's a second lavender that grows in Germany that's close, and they don't really know why, but it's because of the variables. It's because of the altitude, it's because of the temperature of the air, it's because of the soil and the makeup. It's because of more things than we can possibly even understand, and cannabis is going to be no different. So trying to maximize as much as you can in one specific area won't be the most important thing that we really want to discuss. It'll be finding the best places in the world to grow the most unique terpene expressions. That's sort of, I just wanted to change it a little bit and answer it in that way, because I just feel that trying to just pack a bunch of plants and grow a product, and what I mean by terpenes and the importance of the terpenes is most people's cannabis is in the 1% terpene profile. So if you took the pound of cannabis, you get maybe 1% of terpenes. People that win a lot of these cups, like down at the Emerald Cup and High Times and Karma, they may have plants in the 2 to 3% terpene range. But there are companies now breeding cultivars that are in 5 to 10% terpene range. That is extremely loud. That's like having your stereo on full blast with really high-end speakers. So I think that's going to be the more important thing. Do we want to grow McDonald's, or do we want to produce something that's actually medicine?
That's great, Marcus, and I'd just like to expand off that. As we look through these genetics, I think plant numbers only serve limitations-wise to plant numbers serve to limit us for our genetic expressions. When we plant lots of seeds, it's very difficult to find, those perfect terpene profiles and those very loud expressions when you only have 4 plants, 8 plants to go through. So, not to mention, we have to keep mother plants, once we find varieties that work for us, and I think plant numbers further, stop us from being able to do this. So I think while there's innovation that's definitely fostered from only having 4 plants and being able to maximize production, there's no guarantee that the phenotype I give to you is going to work well in your environment and give you the terpene expression the way you grow it that you want. And in order to find that, you're going to have to put down a lot of seeds, and you're going to not be able to do that if you're limited by plants.
Tell them the number of seeds. When he says a lot, tell them, 10,000?
So the number of seeds, if we look at a Punnett square and we just play off of Mendelian genetics, then let's say we're isolating for 5 traits, then we'd be going at over 1,000 plants. So 1,064 plants exactly. If we were looking for recessive traits, we'd have to go through just to find that one that expresses all 5 of those recessive genes.
And that's 5.
That's 5. That's 5. What happens if we want to focus on a dozen or 30 or 100, different expressions, right? So currently, we're finding genetic expressions are very skewed towards end patient, right? Our consumption and the terpene profiles, the potency. But, we also have to remember there's a lot of variables in the production environment that we could optimize as well.
Yeah, so definitely I think Marcus had a good point that those limits are set to actually kind of control in our leftovers from prohibition. And I totally agree with Matt also, because the more you're gonna have, if for example for the selection, if you wish your kid to become president of the United States, I mean, you better have a lot of kids in your life to make sure ones get it right. So it only prevents us from achieving a better quality and better pheno hunting and stuff like this. It's and that also, like Matt said, it's production is a threat we select for, right in the middle between there's production and then you have quality, you have workability, I call it, like how much work you have to put to that plant to make sure it expresses optimum expressions. So it's I think it's a limit that's going to fall over the time, and it's going to be an easy battle to win. But it's going to come there, I think, and they should literally limit us. Considering what do you do? Are you looking to get a medicine and find a new genetics for your condition, or are you just producing for commercial purpose and then maybe limit through the weight of production every year or every trimester? I don't know, right? So.
And do you think that's going to happen in the future? Do you think
I really think it's going to happen. I always say to some of my friends that look at the alcohol prohibition, for example, when they legalized alcohol, they didn't open bars the next morning. No, exactly. It took time. The same thing happened, I think, with the wine industry. For the home breweries and stuff, some provinces are obviously harsher than other ones. I come from Quebec, so we can have booze everywhere, but in some province, it's tightly regulated. And I think it's to the public, and it's a social fight that we need to have to say we're responsible enough to take care of this ourselves, right?
I find that really interesting, a focus on yield as just one factor in the panoply of things you look at. And do you think that there will be, say 10 years from now, there will be a focus on yield? Or do you think that the focus is going to, as Marcus mentioned, a focus more on terpenes, on various...
Well, I think more the people, more the people get, access to great grown cannabis. I mean, they obviously learn it just like, alcohol. A few people know how to, make the difference between a very good wine or a generic wine and stuff. So I think the market's going to drive us there. I don't think like the regular, quality will be what will be driving. I think there will be a very close evolution to what you can see in wine, because that's basically the same thing, For example, in a cigarette, you want the same brand, same taste every time. But in the wine, you want to explore those flavors and those aroma terpenes and strength of cannabis. And I think that's truly where it's going to go. Maybe in 5 or 10 years from now on, everything will be set in place, I believe, because it's a new thing that the general public has to also make their point on. But talking about production, for giving an example, having won quite a few cups myself, not all genetics that I grow are massive producer or easy to grow. Sometimes you get that winner that you say, okay, I'm getting nightmares and headaches to grow that strain, but this is the only one that came up like this with that particular terpenes or strength or something like this, right? So it's definitely only one trait, and I think it's one out of, like you said, 4, 5, 6, depending on what your focus is on.
And so this leads quite well, actually, into a question that's focused largely for licensed producers. What effect does the scale have, although everyone can answer it, what effect does scale have on breeding? So if you're able to grow an unlimited number of plants, does it foster... So essentially a focus on scale and breeding, so unlimited plant counts and breeding, and then scale and cultivation practices, which we covered previously. So do you think that it fosters good growing and breeding practices and quality products, or is it just a bigger room for error?
To have limitations or to have no limitations?
No limitations.
No limitations for breeding are absolutely 100% essential. It cannot be any different way. What Matt was just saying in regards to 1,000+ plants, that is the minimum amount of cannabis plants you would require to maintain genetic diversity. But most breeders don't want to go with the minimum of genetic diversity. So you can easily plant, like for instance, we have a project we're doing in Jamaica. We're going to be breeding the lion back into Jamaica. Jamaica has no lions in the jungle. Metaphorically, they're all kittens. They get attacked by molds. You have North American and European growers who thought it was a good idea to take cultivars from the Afghan region where molds and mildews don't exist because it's so dry and humid, and taking those to exotic locations close to the equator where it's very humid and very hot, and mold just kills these plants. Well, we're going to be bringing 50,000 to 75,000 haze by haze seeds, and we'll plant all of them. And then our breeder will go through and he'll pick the traits that he's looking for amongst 50,000 to 75,000 plants. And I can promise you, the plants that get produced from that will seemingly, in this day and age, because prohibition has affected us in such a monstrous way, it's erased terpenes from our profiles that we don't see anymore. We've lost valuable cannabinoid profiles. Not lost, let's say misplaced. Landrace strains still exist. They're still there. Old school guys have these collections, the stewards of these plants that have been holding on to them. But, I mean, the short answer is absolutely not. You can't have plant limits on breeding. That's so absurd.
So I'm not a breeder myself, but definitely like when it comes only just to pheno-selecting, a plant, the more chance you have to select, the better it is. So if you select, let's say, one plant out of 500, it's probably going to be a good plant, and you're going to say, well, that's 1 of 500. If you get 1 out of 2,000, you may get that one that you didn't get before. And like Marcus said, with all these, people bringing genetics here and there, like you said, from Afghanistan to the tropical places and stuff like this. I mean, we almost lost CBD at one point with this in the recreational market of seeds, because what on the underground market, everything was striving out of the high you would get out of marijuana. So when you got a CBD strain, which doesn't get you high and actually almost makes you less high than you were, it was automatically discarded before the science got into it, right? So since since the years 2007, 8, 9, when you first start to see cannatonics and then all these things, it was literally start to breed in again all those genetics, and that's something we could have lost with limits of plants on selections and for breeding purpose.
I just want to add one thing to that. It was the Ukrainians, Goroborodko from the Institute of Bast Fiber in the 90s, who was told he was actually told in the 80s, maybe the late 70s, the DEA said get rid of THC or get rid of hemp. And he created a simple litmus test for walking through his fields, and if it turned purple, it had THC in it, he pulled the plants. They were very much responsible for the lowest THC plants on the planet. 0.01% was the Zola tenosha from the 90s, and that was the first hemp that we grew across Canada in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. But that cultivar, CBD started appearing out of it, and once you start breeding THC out or lowering the numbers, other cannabinoids magically appear.
So I think I'll go a slightly different way with this question, just to take it in a new direction. Definitely everything my colleagues are saying about scale, it's essential for breeding. And what I've experienced working at a couple of licensed producers, some of the largest in the company, and setting up systems for them, is the ability for collaboration and interdisciplinary skill sets, right? And what I mean by this is bringing in scientists, being able to work with internationally renowned breeders like DNFM, and bringing them into these scaled, well-designed environments, and being able to work with scientists to be able to accomplish these great objectives. So for me, that's been one of the biggest advantages of the ACMPR, having a licensed producer and being able to breed at scale.
And so on to question 3. So mold, contaminants, heavy metals, pesticides, etc., and cannabis. Is this issue being overblown? Or is there a serious concern both from LP cannabis and from MMAR, gray market cannabis gardeners? Where does the blame lie, and how do we fix it?
Is it being overblown? Well, if you're someone that uses cannabis for maybe anxiety or like headaches or something, it might not be overblown. But if you're someone who has a catastrophic illness that's going to end your life, like Lewis-Gastro syndrome or something that's extremely sensitive like Crohn's, it means a lot. It makes a huge difference. Certain people are extremely sensitive to toxic molds, microbials, pesticides. Part of the problem in our industry is that a ton of the industry right now, because we're desperately clinging on to the prohibition dollar that was once how many of us paid for our mortgages and our homes and everything, and it's hard to kind of let that prohibition profit go, and a great way to hold on to it is to turn all your shitty weed into distillate and put fruit terps in it and throw it into a pen and sell it to patients. But unfortunately, pesticides have the same molecular weight as cannabinoids. And when you short path molecular distillation, you're separating out by molecular weight. And when those two things have the same molecular weight, what do you think you end up with in the end product? You end up with a concentrated poison that is even more damaging than the cannabis itself. So I personally don't think it's overblown. I think the more we focus, if you're selling to patients, if your whole thing is patients, then make it as clean as possible. I mean, we do it with food.
Yeah, I think you're dead right, Marcus, on it, because I've seen lately, like, sometimes desperate parents actually looking for either more affordable price or getting short out of the LP oil for their kids, and looking at dispensaries having those often untested product or tested for THC, CBD. Yeah, where's the contaminant results on that thing? And I think, for me, I call it like kind of, the snake oil sellers and stuff like this. I mean, if the product has to go to a patient that, like you say, anxiety, nightmares, or PTSD, you can grow it in your backyard, and you're probably not going to make your condition worse because you're overall out of this, in the body healthy. But someone who has a late stage cancer, or someone who has HIV and is getting in the end of his life, I mean, you don't want to make his life worse by slowly contaminating him with some ornamental pesticide that you bought at the hydro store and stuff like this. I mean, that's where the ethic has to be regulated at one point, because if you just trust the ethic of people, I mean, we all know some people that are unethical, right? So, I mean.
I always ask the question, who would pay taxes if they didn't have to?
So as a patient myself, I think we all deserve contaminant-free cannabis. You know, we should demand it. We all deserve it. And that being said, I'm very happy to say that when Health Canada came knocking at 7 Acres, you know, we submitted a bunch of samples. They came into the vault and we tested clean. So I'm very proud to say that. There's been far too many recalls in the industry, and I'm just happy to say, you know, we haven't been involved with that. I think the key is education. I think the key is education around integrated pest management for growers and educating growers about the options with beneficials and the option with organic options that are available to them to control their crops from pests, funguses, and different diseases and viruses that can afflict their production.
And we've also found now that you know, the Emerald Cup was really responsible for this last year. It was an unbelievable thing where organic farmers were failing myclobutanol tests, and they learned that myclobutanol is passed on through seeds and through clones. That thing is genetic. You spray that on your plants, you grow it up, and you give clones to an organic grower. Their flower will pass, their concentrates will fail. This is a big conversation that needs to happen in our community.
Yeah, because like from the unregulated market that, you know, actually design our industry right now, everyone going in the hydro store has access to ornamental, like I said, pesticide, fungicides and stuff. I mean, the most important right now, because there's no like educational centers, you know, for saying about this, educate yourself about like the safe way to protect your crop instead of taking the short path and say, oh, I'm going to spray this, just I'm going to save the
Eagle
crop,
20.
right? Yeah.
Nova 40. I think we should call them by name, right? Like, no point in dancing around it. If you see these products in someone's grow, question the grower, right? We shouldn't be using them.
That leads actually quite well into a question for all of you. So we're faced now with a situation where growers may be moving from large indoor hydroponic grows to outdoor greenhouse organic grows. And I think an important question to ask is what your opinions are on organic versus nutrient-based cultivation practices, and can large-scale cultivators go organic? Is that possible? Should they? And what value does maximizing yield through careful nutrient regimens have in an atmosphere where you can grow as many cannabis plants as you want?
Well, you know, I'm not really very much experienced with, you know, pure organic method about growing. I normally would use like, for example, BioCanna, which is an organic full recipe soil and nutrient, liquid nutrient. I think there's good to change to organics, but you know, in the purpose of commercializing a product and to have stable and standard result over and over again, you know, I'm a big believer of going of all hydroponic in those systems, definitely. And I think if you look at the quality standpoint, you know, like the organic will work as magic in the plant, but what you know, how could I say it? What dictate the quality of the product is often the care you give it and the climate. The climate is the most important thing. It will prevent a lot of the problems during the grow, and it actually will help expressing the best of the plants you're growing. So for the nutrient brand or system or method to grow, I think it's really a personal choice at that point.
Please. For large-scale cultivation, I think there's been a few licensed producers that have done it successfully. They're currently doing it successfully, and they've managed to find themselves certified by different governing bodies like EcoCert. I don't think we have an OMRI certified LP yet. So it's great, and it can be done at scale, but at what scale, right? We have licensed producers building greenhouses at over 1 million square feet right now, and we have to remember that one of the most important criteria of the medicine we give our patients is consistency. And when you have to mix the soil yourself, it becomes a full-on secondary business activity, right? There's a lot that goes into making regulated soil, and at that size, to find an organic producer that can supply licensed producers at this time, the consistency just isn't available to you for an off-the-shelf option.
You know, to me, it boils down to money, and it boils down to integrity, and it boils down to choice. And just like food, there's always going to be organic, and there's always going to be chemical. And a lot of people that don't buy organic food don't do it because they don't want to. They can't fucking afford it. And so when you have chemicals subsidizing industries that make things seem cheaper while costing more on healthcare and on our environment, it's a bit of an illusion. For me, I think large-scale organic growing is 100% possible. I love the idea of bacteria on the roots, on living soils, on teas, producing a living bacteria and a living microenzymes that are growing all over the plant that basically produce. They cover the roots, they cover the entire plant, and they help the plant fight against disease and pests, and they help the plant express itself genetically. Then unless you're creating those symbiotic relationships, you'll never get it from just feeding it a 3-part food. That being said, you can't just get rid of 3-part foods and all of the non-organic methods of growing, because those are choices, and how we've set our system up is that people use their money to make their choices. I just hope that they don't have to sacrifice their integrity while they're doing it.
And actually, what are your thoughts now? We're at this landmark moment as a country where every household is going to be able to grow 4 plants in their backyard if they want. What are your thoughts? If you were looking at it and they said, how do I grow these 4 plants? How would you tell them to do it?
Well, I think, being new in the the licensed producer system, there's a lot of regulation when it comes down to production and the intent of selling to the masses or to the patient. But I think definitely if you want to give it a try home, you should definitely experiment with organic, and you're not really regulated in the sense of what you're going to put in your plant, or just like I was saying about pesticides, no one's going to show up at your place and say, hey, you shouldn't put that on your plant. It's all about education and making sure that you do the best for yourself. Some people will not care about their own health, just like they eat at McDonald's 3 times a day, and some people will want to experiment and know more about it. That's actually, where I'm from. I try to separate what was from the unregulated industry that were shortcuts like different nasty pesticide and fungicide, and said, okay, I'm gonna go that way and keep going forward to make sure that I just produce something that I'm proud to put my name on, So I think at that point, when it's for you, you will have the choice. But I would definitely encourage to go with professional feeding systems or brands that are proven to be efficient, and being able to be leached out of the plants after. A lot of people still buy Miracle Grow 2020 when they don't know that there's a bad ink in there that keeps your plant green. So of course it looks healthy, but I mean it's all about personal choice. If you want to get something that's going to harm you as less as possible, or you just don't care because the only thing you want is not to buy it from someone else. So I think it's really a personal, but I hope everyone starts to educate themselves more and do it the proper way for themselves, just like eating.
I 100% support home growing, and I think everyone should try it at one point in their lives because it's an extremely rewarding experience to cultivate your own medicine. I highly recommend it. That being said, I would like to see more availability for genetics. I am genetically biased, but I would like to see more availability for genetics for Canadians that are allowed to cultivate their 4 plants. I'd like to even see a niche business model like we have with apple trees, where we could exploit only having 4 plants by grafting multiple varieties onto a strong root base. Grab like a critical mass, rootstock or something really strong, and find a couple varieties that have very similar structure and flowering time, and maybe we can do a Chemdog and an OG on the same bush, and But I would encourage Canadians to stay under 1 meter, because apparently, we're going to have to be scrogging our plants and get really good at trellising and LST, and that's my advice.
Yeah, I would say much the same thing. I wouldn't really tell anyone that there's a specific best way for an individual to grow plants for themselves. But what I would say is that it is a wonderful rabbit hole that goes extremely deep, and it teaches you so much about yourself. It teaches you so much about even, the way you take care of your body. I mean, cannabis is teaching so many people that are now like, oh, it should be organic and it should be grown this way, and I don't want it processed any other way than this, and I only use it in these special tools that are really like rated for this, that, and the other thing. But then they're eating cheeseburgers and like the lowest quality food they're putting into their body, and then they're watching the lowest quality news, and those are also things that you put into your body. And for me, cannabis and growing cannabis in particular really opened up my world to like planting food and learning about food and organics. And hey, if I don't want this in my lungs, why would I want it in my stomach? So
And so that leads quite well, actually, into the next question, which is, so what if every house has 4 plants in the backyard and every house has 1 male plant? Do you think we're going to start seeing wild cannabis more frequently? And if so, would you foresee that some sort of stabilized, not land race, but some sort of a stabilized wild strain might emerge, hypothetically, and what would it look like, just based on pollen simply being dispersed and finding female plants and seeds being developed?
Well, I think that's maybe something you're going to see more in the country, because from my understanding of the last consultation I've seen in Quebec, like they're not crazy about the idea of having the outdoor 4 plants right in the middle of a townhouse, right? So I think maybe more in the country you're going to see something like this for my particular case, from what I can talk. But definitely I think any biodiversity added to cannabis is something that's going to be good, because we need more and more. As more that we learn, more that we discover things that we even thought about, on the science side. So, I think it's a good thing, honestly, if something like this happened.
I have a hard time thinking that a land race will arise from all of that human interaction, but something unique could, for sure. I'm not as worried about male plants. We were a little worried when we started growing hemp in Canada, and people were like, oh, the hemp plants are going to pollinate everyone's. I love how people are an expert on things they know nothing about. The hemp plants are going to pollinate everyone's plants. Well, we've never seen that. That hasn't been a problem. They said it in Jamaica, too. Oh, you can't grow seedless plants in Jamaica. We just grew a fucking acre of 1,000 plants, 5 to 7 feet tall, not a seed to be found on a single one of them. You can do it. It's not impossible. Just pay attention.
I agree with Marcus, and I think it'll be supported by a shift towards utilizing auto-flowering and feminized varieties. I think there's already been a shift in the genetics we're purchasing, and I think this is going to continue trending in this direction, and males are going to be less and less common. I really do.
And what about hemp farmers? So do you think hemp farmers have cause for concern that their low THC varietals are suddenly going to start popping up with much, much higher THC levels because a neighbor has got a male plant?
No, hemp farmers should be celebrated. They changed the way everyone thinks about cannabis. The minute hemp started growing in Canada, dispensaries opened up a few years later. They would never have opened up prior to that. Hemp changed the way people think.
I don't think hemp farmers have a particular cause for concern, to be honest.
And so I'm going to focus now on essentially what do you guys together think are the top 5? We are running a little bit long. The top 5 innovations to have occurred in the world of cannabis gardening, because so much of the innovation in agriculture came from our community doing things under cover of darkness, per se. But how much of that, like what are the top 5 innovations that have happened?
I'll start it off. I picked something that was related to breeding, not specifically to cultivation, and I'd like to, give props to Mr. Soul from Brothers Grimm, who kind of revolutionized, how we play with hybrids by introducing us to the cubing process, right? I think he really took it mainstream by, familiarizing us all with the 3-time backcross to be able to standardize a variety very quickly, and it's a quick way to, continue a line.
I would say one of the big, obviously 12-12 was the biggest. Once people figured out how to cut the flowering cycle and actually bud the plants. Before that, they were growing, these exotic cultivars from Colombia and Jamaica and Mexico they were never flowering. They were just growing leaf. So 12-12 is definitely the number one. But another one that's big is extracting and hash making and oil making, because this got people to look at the plant instead of for the vegetative growth and the flowering period. It got people to look at the cannabinoid profile, the terpene profile, and the actual weight of the glandular trichome heads. So I think focusing on the resin was a big deal, because let's be honest, we just grow the plant for the resin.
Yeah, I think Marcus has a good point there. you know, without some science to it, we, you know, like a lot of mostly growers will focus on taste, you know, productivity, and you know the flower looks and stuff. But same thing that was going on with the CBD, where people were trying to discard. People may discard sometimes like flowers that contain something that is totally crazy, and they're not aware about. So yeah, definitely the extraction is something like it never ceases to amaze me. Like every product that people invent with, you know, like adding like the distillates and all these things, they come with multiple way of using those extraction, like with the terpenes separated from Blue Rivers and stuff like this, and other companies around that Trinity Terpenes and all these guys trying to teach people by giving them an experience. You know, you try a dab of distillate, and you all of a sudden you figure that the terpenes is actually what gives you the high, right? So a lot of people, you know, still don't know this, but you know, for example, one of my strongest, you know, stronger effect couch lock strain has quite low THC, but has crazy terpenes amount, and it's actually what dictate the effect you have on the weed. So it's all that science that's behind the extraction and the trichomes, I think, and what's inside the plant is really what's changing our world right now, because that's the future of either pharmaceutical medicine standardized out of cannabis, or just straight discovering like flowers, smoking like you discover wine tasting.
And so I think coupled with that is the mainstream availability of gas chromatographs and HPLC technology, and just coming down in price to the point now where we can get lab analysis and have our terpenes and our cannabinoids identified for a couple $100s in a lot of cases, right? So having this readily available to us, I think, changes the way we select plants, changes the cultivars we grow, how we grow them, and
for us, it's a little bit like the invention of the GPS. You all of a sudden have like a better clue of where you're going.
You actually know what it is you're using. Imagine before it was like, oh, that's just the OG Kush. It's like, yeah, but what is it? What's the profile?
And so
and also you can identify some of these without a lab. When you say, oh, that smells remind me of this, it's gonna go towards that kind of effect probably, and often you're right on.
And so that's almost an implicit argument for storefront dispensaries, in that individuals need to smell what they're purchasing. Is that unique to cannabis? They need to smell it before they buy it. Is that fair to say?
I would only add that, you know, not necessarily. Certain people absolutely will want it. It should be an option. You should be able to smell it. But for someone that has a specific ailment, that has gone very specifically, knows what terpenes they require, knows what cannabinoids they require, they're going to be able to buy a product that is like accurate to the dosing. And that could honestly be, you know, the more accurate you want to get, the more you're forced into the sort of monomolecular medicine, which is, you know, earlier when I shit on distillate, I shit on the negative aspect of it. There's a positive aspect of distillate, of molecularly separating out cannabinoids to specifically accurate doses, because when you have a form of epilepsy that the slightest variable in the profile will cause you more seizures instead of less, that becomes extremely important to make sure that that person is getting an absolutely accurate dosage of exactly the profile of terpenes and cannabinoids that it says is on that product.
Yeah, predictability with standardization, so you can treat the same symptoms over and over again, is definitely the key for this.
Yeah, I think personally, I stood up on a panel a couple months ago beside the president of OPSU, and I believe that it is a product that should be interacted with organoleptically, right? I think the way it smells, the way it looks, the way our sensories responds to it, I think it's important to patients to be able to experience that. I think rec market, that's open, but as a licensed producer, you know, we're agnostic, you know, with our wholesale model about who we sell to. You know, we have a wholesale model where if we're available, you know, we hope we have good retailers to be able to provide our product to, but ultimately, you know.
Well, you know what? It's once again the prohibition of anything. So, oh, we're not allowed to have, obviously, civil disobedience. There's a gazillion dispensaries, but it's a full-on war. And when they start these stores, and I'm not against stores. A lot of people thought I was against them. They were like, oh, there's 150 stores that are going to open up in Ontario. I'm like, that's amazing. Like 150 access points for people that will have access to cannabis. I wouldn't waste a minute fighting against any of that, and I would waste all my time, or not waste my time, but spend my time fighting for dispensaries' rights. You don't have to fight against the 150 stores that are coming in to fight for dispensaries. So I think a lot of people have a hard time making that sort of call.
And do you think that with a focus on standardization and reliability in genetics, do you think that will stifle innovation, or does innovation in our genetics just take it becomes its own monster in which there's a team doing research and development and also a team focused just on maintaining reliable and standardized crops?
As the director of research and development at a $225 million publicly traded company, I feel like I have a bit of a bias on this. But that being said, we've seen it, progress in other industries where tobacco, as an example, after World War I, it was in a situation where we had heirloom varieties, and there was a connoisseur aspect to it, and the aromas were evaluated and the way things burned. And as the industrialization of that product occurred, we saw it boil down to just 3 or 4 essential varieties that got cultivated. And I think as long as we're cognizant of this and we spend resources, on research and development programs, and we listen to what's working for people and really focus on developing a strong medical program in parallel with the recreational market, then I really hope that we can maintain genetic diversity. I really do.
Yeah, I think we need that diversity. What really is the enemy in there is that whole legalization is kind of affecting more 2 generation, my generation and the people after me and older, that actually lived so much out of the illegal cannabis and know so much about it. But what really worries me is, like, in order to not let this happen, I mean, if you look at the new generation, they don't really care about this. They just want to know where and when and how much they're going to pay, and they're lazy. If they can get it, by the mail, they will want it by the mail, as instead of going to a corner store. So if we don't let that happen by having like program like Matt is running with the R&D and trying to increase biodiversity, I think it's not going to happen. I think we're going to go the way of the wine, and that's what we should be focusing on, because if it comes down to just a few varieties, I mean, that will decrease quite the pleasure, I'm pretty sure.
It'll be a bottom line thing. The people who want their integrity to stay high and want to just put out a product. I used to own a vegan, raw food, organic cafe. Super high integrity, 0 profit. Like literally 0 profit. It's like you're giving people the most amazing, beautiful food. So it's going to be the same way in the cannabis industry. It's like if you watch the movie The Founder, Ray Kroc, McDonald's, yeah, let's do this. These guys started McDonald's. It was like quality. Ray Kroc came in and turned it into this industrial complex that was like, we can do this cheaper, we can get these powdered milkshakes, and so that's many companies will do this, and the craft companies won't. And it'll be just like every other industry that we have. 90+% of them will be swag, 10% of them will be worth spending your money with, and the 90% will do billions and billions and billions in sales.
And do you see that as a battleground in the future with the breeding community producing fascinating cannabis genetics for years in the underground, and now we have licensed producers with a set stable of genetics? Do you see future lawsuits going on about intellectual property in cannabis seeds? Is this a real concern?
It's happening. It's going to happen. Utility patents, cannabis registrations. We have this conversation on my weekly show, Hash Church, if any of you guys have watched it on YouTube. We have great conversations and dialogues every Sunday, and one of the conversations was this very conversation. And I'm lucky to have a good friend of mine, Skunkman Sam, a.k.a. David Watson. He was the breeder. He's a master breeder. He's, in fact, the only master breeder I've ever met in the entire cannabis industry. He plants 50,000 plants at a time. He's obviously the breeder that's going to be doing our work in Jamaica. I would never choose anyone else. The man is like a savant when it comes to finding these incredible cultivars. And so, kind of forgot where I was going to go with that, but...
So will people get sued if they use someone else's
Right,
genetics
so-
and rename it? Do you
So
think
here's
that
the
is-
thing about someone else's genetics. Most people in our industry have not been breeding. They've been throwing seeds into a closet and using the work of guys like Skunkman Sam, who actually bred skunk number one. And by that, I mean he hired greenhouses, he hired a team, he got DEA export licenses so he could use labs around the world. He paid millions of dollars to chemists and to PhDs and to agricultural specialists like Robert Connell Clark, breeders like himself, and they put all this time and energy into creating products that I can promise you you will never accidentally create in your grow room. So those plants have to be respected. It doesn't mean that they should be completely controlled, but it's pretty hard to say, wow, so you spent $5 million breeding a cultivar that absolutely does not exist in any of the cultivars we've ever tested. It could be a high CBG with a low CBC with an alpha pinene concentrate of terpene. You understand? Something that's so rare that we've never seen it. Well, I, for one, am very stoked on those companies to do that work and make those plants available. On the other side of it, you have a bunch of people just throwing seeds in closets and producing seeds for seed companies that aren't necessarily stable genetics. And so that's very different. Like, you have $10,000 invested in your seed company versus you put $6 million into a 5-year breeding project. How can you not let those people register those cultivars? Should they just be free? Should they have to give them away to everyone that wants them? It's a tricky conversation.
But again, the same thing that was going with, like the unregulated, like whatever pesticide the people buy in hydro store. I mean, it comes from a mostly worldwide, illegal industry. So with the new legal industry, like in Canada and Uruguay and all those places, you're going to see the same protection coming to protect the work of these people that we have for grape strain or for wheat, for anything. I mean, they will be patent probably on or protection on those genetics 100%, because I mean, now it's going to become part of the agricultural science.
And nothing in the gene pool of current popularity, nothing that you're worried about, nothing that you know about, will ever be taken from you because it's publicly accessible. It's obvious, already been published to the public. It's available. They can't patent anything that you currently have, only shit that they're going to produce that doesn't exist. Do you get the difference? It's a big difference. It's a big difference.
That should almost be followed with a mic drop. Like, you hit the... That was the nail on the head, right? And I think if we look at, available resources to us, like the Phylos Bioscience Strain Galaxy, mildly, right? And I think you can see on that, like the particular cultivars, like skunk number one, that were developed and time was spent on them. Because look at the amount of breeding projects we find these strains popping up with, right? There was something special about the cultivar that was developed, and as a result, we see a narrowing gene pool because that plant was used in so many different hybrids, right? But I think the breeder deserves to get recognition for that and compensation, personally.
And so with that in mind, I think a lot of people are thinking about the pricing of a gram of cannabis. And so implicit in that, there's almost an intellectual property value in the cost of, and you don't think of it with, say, tobacco. That this is Northern Virginia strain X of tobacco. But with cannabis, is there an intellectual property value in the bud that would prevent cannabis from ever being 30 cents a gram, $2 a gram? Do you think that has an effect?
I think that greed and prohibition has an effect. Prohibition ended, and did the prices of cannabis change? I didn't see it change. Not at dispensaries and not at LPs. They're still selling $3,000 to $5,000 pounds to patients. And guess what? Cannabis costs the same to grow as tomatoes. Yep, it's true. I hate to break it to all of you, but it is absolutely the truth. You can grow cannabis for pennies on the gram. I bet you we could produce hashish here and oil in Canada for dollars on the gram, $1, $2, $3 a gram. That's reasonable. And that's still with the intellectual property of the breeders. Do you think they sell grain for like $400 for 10 seeds? That's absurd. It's like we're all on boats. If you buy anything for a boat, like, oh, I want a barbecue, it's $100. Oh, it's for my boat. Oh, it's $1,600. That's the cannabis industry to the T.
And I think that's why it's important not to over-regulate, right? As we add regulations for security to monitor for diversion, as we add regulations for every aspect of the system, if we're not careful, the black market's going to have a severe advantage.
And the black market won't go away ever until we create a market that allows it to dissolve. As long as they limit us in anything that we want, the black market will exist. You start selling grams of hash and herb for pennies and dollars, I'll stop growing.
Yeah, it's often I actually had a discussion because people ask me often if the black market's going to go away, and honestly, it will go away if we can, bring if the price of the product goes down enough that it doesn't work for them. Like I used to run a hydro store for a long time, and everyone knows about the M39 of Quebec. That's very simple. At $1,500 a pound, people either close their grow ups or grow M39 in Quebec. That's what they do. So if you get a legal weed for $1,500, you're gonna put them out of business because they're not gonna work like crazy to do a pocket full of change.
You hear the growers, man, I can't even get $1,000 a pound anymore. I'm like, motherfucker. You know what a pound of butter costs? You know what a pound of tomatoes cost? You know what a pound of, $1,000 is so, that's an insane price for cannabis, especially considering that not everyone's pound is the same. And what if your pound only has 3% cannabinoids on it and 1% terpenes? Wow, that's expensive.
And so I wanted to, so in Canada, to be qualified as industrial hemp, there's a percentage of THC that a plant might need. And the exactitude of that requirement, 0.3% WW, from Dr. Ernest Small, do you foresee that requirements like that for cannabis, do you foresee that happening? Do you foresee approved cultivars of cannabis for people to use in the same way that you can only grow under the industrial hemp regulations, like 20 approved cultivars of hemp? Do you foresee that for cannabis?
Well, I hope not, but what I see so far and what people notice so far is like the excess of genetic material to the commercial growers like Matt or Canveda or other LPs is very limited. And I mean, we've been all arguing that we should, or fighting that we should have more opens to more door opens to genetic materials and stuff. So I hope not, because I mean it's part of the fun of cannabis, right? Trying different varieties, trying different cultivar. Like we spoke enough of selection on that panel that I think everyone understand that we, if you want to have that super special strain, you may need like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 seeds.
I'd like to recommend Ernest Small's last book. He published it end of 2016. It's well referenced. It's a great book. I think anyone should check it out if they're interested in some of the scientific literature behind cannabis cultivation. Now, I interpreted that question as cannabis varieties with low THC being able to go outside and being produced in the field.
Right, and what I was focused on is I think that the limitations under the industrial hemp regulations, like their concern is it's not industrial hemp anymore if it raises, and so there's been this very much a specificity in how industrial hemp is bred. And do you see that happening with where they go like, whoa, you've got purple Urkel at 17.1% THC, like get that out of your backyard. Like, do you see approved cultivars like that happening for the strains that we know and love?
I could definitely see it, as we progress towards regulation, anything's possible. But I also see the inverse of it, Jack. And I see the potential for low THC cannabis-derived genetics that are CBD dominant to go outside and be cultivated as hemp, right? And I think we see this transition happening in the States where some of our isolates are actually coming from Kush varieties. And it's great to be able to extract full-spectrum Kush terps, from hemp cultivated outside. Now, has Canada's industrial hemp progressed to that point? Not that I'm aware of to this point, but I think we will see that development.
I think the whole situation happened because, the whole hemp in Canada really occurred because we found that thanks to Jack Herrer and the Emperor Wears No Clothes And in that book, we sort of found like, you know, this peace treaty, this Narcotics Act has an amendment in there, and it says low THC hemp. And so it was, once again, it was a prohibition thing that we're like, okay, well, what if we can get rid of THC? Then we could still produce hemp. I don't personally see it happening with cannabis. I can't imagine it happening. And in fact, before it happens with cannabis, I could see us growing high cannabinoid profile hemp in Canada for all of the 50,000 commercial products that you can make with the plant, including the seed oil, but also then extracting the, I don't know if it's hundreds of millions of dollars in CBD and other cannabinoids that we flush down the toilet since we started our hemp industry. Maybe it's in the billions because we started in 1994. But initially, the whole reason this happened this way was because we lied to the Minister of Agriculture. We told him that cannabis is a distant cousin of hemp. And so that was they're just like, oh, okay, so it doesn't have the THC. They're so terrified of THC. THC is like the black sheep of the family. CBD, well, that's the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, valedictorian fucking quarterback of the football field dating the cheerleader. Everyone loves CBD, but THC is extremely important, and it's never going to go anywhere. If they rip the teeth out of the hashish eaters in the 14th century in the Cairo Square, and those guys kept eating hashish, they're never going to get THC away from us.
Okay, I think that was wonderful. We should maybe open up to some questions from the audience. If folks have, these are cultivation gurus and gods before you, so if you've got a question about your cannabis garden or a question about cannabis in general, we're certainly open to it if anyone has any. Yeah, certainly, come on.
So a recent thing I saw online was people doing bud washing when they're harvesting their plants. It was something I'd never heard of before, and just what your guys' opinion was. Because whatever I thought was like, if your bud gets wet with water, it's garbage. Now people say submerge it for up to a few minutes and then hang it to dry.
Well, as a hash maker, I'm really more of a hash maker than anything, but you can't make hash without growing resin, so it's a symbiotic relationship. So washing the plant from the perspective of a hash maker, which should be kind of just as important from the perspective of a non-hash maker. Many people who have used my bags over the years, I'm the Bubbleman, I made the bubble bags, for those of you that don't know, water extraction process. And a lot of people over the years would run the material after they cured out their plants, and they would be like, my second batch was a little cleaner than my first. Does that make any sense? And I'm like, well, probably. Do you have fans in your room? Oh, yeah. Oh, do you sweep in your room when the fans are on? Oh, yeah. Okay, so you're covering your plants in dust and debris and dirt. And so that stuff is heavy and it's sinking in your first wash. You can wash that stuff off. Now, I haven't heard it as dipping a plant and hanging it, but what I do is I pre-wash the material before I wash it. So when I take plants that have been freshly grown in a greenhouse and hung and cured for me, I'll take those plants and I'll put them in a large thing of water. The water's not too cold because the cold water is what will make the wax membranes of the glandular trichomes brittle, and that'll make them break. But it's also not warm because we don't want to melt the heads and make them sappy. And then I'll put the plant matter in there and I'll just gently sort of knead it with my hands, very gently, and release those heavy little bits of dust and fiber and debris. And you'll pull the plant matter out and you'll see in the bottom of the tub dirt, like sand, rocks, little pieces of things. And so for me, obviously, I don't want them in my hash. It produces a weird ash, it produces a weird flavor, and it's just not really a medicine. So I think that washing plants can make sense in certain conditions.
Yeah, definitely, because I think it depends on what you spray on them or the cleanness of the place. And again, it comes down to ethic. I mean, you have to always keep in mind that cleanness and sanitation is the most important. You don't broom the place, like you say, when you have flowering plants and stuff. The same goes, like in vegging is where it's more permissive. But as soon as you have a sticky granular trichomes, you definitely want to have the cleanest environment possible to prevent to do this.
I would just add to that, as a macro photographer, I would let you all know that the glandular trichomes show up as the second set of leaves, the epicaudal. It's the true first set of leaves. They're serrated. The first set of leaves on cannabis plants is called the cotyledon, and it's round leaves. Those two leaves do not have glandular trichomes. Every single leaf after that is going to be covered in them. So convincing yourself that spraying or sweeping or anything is okay in veg is to not understand what's going on the macro level. And most people don't understand this. I've only started taking these photos, and the first time I ever took a photo of an epicaudal with glandular trichomes, which you can find on my Flickr account, Bubble_Man, it blew my mind, and it changed the way I thought. And it's only been maybe 3 years since I made that discovery.
I've also heard of the addition of hydrogen peroxide when these washes take place, normally when powdery mildew tends to be involved, and I would just like to flag and kind of discourage against that. Anecdotally, haven't been able to verify it with a lab, but I think some level of oxidization takes place when you use like a strong concentration of hydrogen peroxide, and I would avoid it if possible, the addition of that at least.
And I wanted to just, I forgot to ask a question, so I'm going to, so do you guys see a difference in the bast fiber from cannabis to hemp? Just looking, because what sparked me is the comment that as the industrial hemp regulations came in, a white lie was told in regards to hemp's relationship with cannabis. But is there a difference in the bast fiber that's produced?
Yes, and what's that? Yes, hey, Dana Larson gives us the happy 420, and shout out to Dana Larson. Yeah, I would say there's a minor difference, but keep in mind that we haven't really bred cultivars specifically for the commercial production of different products in hemp. What we did was we got hemp in the ground. We were like, yeah, 50,000 commercial products. And then what happened was they were like, okay, but none of that's profitable because there's no infrastructure and we need billions of dollars in infrastructure. So hemp sort of squeezed into seed and oil and hemp seed oil. And that's what the hemp industry in Canada is. And when you plant for seed oil, you plant differently than when you plant for fibers. So when you plant hemp for fiber, you plant the plants very close together, like an insane density of seed per square foot, and they grow up like touching one another, very, very tall and thin, and it's a beautiful fiber, and it bows and rets beautifully, but it's very different from a seed that you grow and you give that room, which creates a more woody sort of like, you're not going to be making clothes, you're not going to be making like nice silky products, you can make like burlap sacks. It's almost like wood. Whereas when you plant proper, regardless of the cultivar, I mean, the breeding is obviously going to be important, but you could plant like OG Kush close enough and tight enough in a field, and it'll do what all plants do. They stretch to access sun. And so...
Yeah, it's again some trait that were bred in. Some of them were more fibrous than other ones, and like he said, the way you plant them is really the way you're gonna focus on your production. You obviously want bigger flowers, bigger seed brackets in there for producing more seeds in order to make oil or edible seeds. Compared to fiber where you don't want any side branches, you want long and skinny branches, right?
I think primarily for the drug traits, the fiber's been bred out, but I haven't been able to test it. I've never tried to manufacture something. But as we see the industry more commercialized, industrialized, and we see much more money and much larger volumes of plants being cultivated, currently our stocks are becoming compost, as mandated by regulations. And I would like to see fiber, become a trait that we care about once again, and hopefully we can, become a more sustainable industry by taking this current byproduct and repurposing it for something beneficial.
Okay, that was an amazing panel. It was an absolute honor for me to host. We have gone a little late, so thank you so much. And I'll finish with the fun question: favorite strain to grow?
I come from Quebec, Friesland.
I'm kind of partial to that old school AK-47.
Okay.
I'll go with my son's middle name, Hayes.
Thank you all so much and apologies for going late. That was amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.